Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. So this is the Nursing and Midwifery Council's webinar on supporting choices for all women in their maternity journey. And so today you're going to have presentations from us here from the midwifery team, and we'll introduce ourselves to you shortly. But before that, I'll just come to a few housekeeping details. So due to the number of attendees, everyone except the presenters are automatically muted. Please do not use the raise your hand and chat features. And please feel free to use the Q&A function for any questions and comments. We'll be monitoring these to take a thematic approach during the Q&A session. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can, but due to the numbers attending, we probably can't answer all of them, but the team will review everything you tell us. The session's being recorded and it's being uploaded to the NMC website after the session, and we'll be sending out the link to everyone. Attendees can switch on live captions in Teams for accessibility. Under the More, 3 dots, select either accessibility or language and speech. So today, we will be having a brief context setting session and then talk about the role of the midwife and the doula in a video that we're going to show you, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So we have our panel here with us today. We've got 3 panel members who will introduce themselves later on, but I just wanted to introduce my 2 midwifery colleagues from the NMC. So I have Jackie Williams, who is our Senior Midwifery Advisor, Education, and Verena Wallace, who is our Senior Midwifery Advisor, Policy. So now I will go over to Jackie, who'll start with the context setting presentation. Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Tracy. So at the NMC, around about 18 months, 2 years ago, we were noticing that we were getting an increasing number of inquiries about the midwife's role when a woman chose to have care outside of guidance. Similarly, we were also receiving a number of queries about the role of the midwife when a woman chose to free birth. And also concerns were raised about a range of unregulated people who were supporting women and how that interfaced with the midwives' roles. And we were hearing about some of the care about doulas, birth keepers, and a whole range of other titles. I think it became clear to Verena and I that many of these issues were not about for the role of the NMC. But we were concerned that some of the concerns raised were potentially putting women at risk, and that very much leads in with our public protection role. And we were also concerned about the anxiety of midwives, particularly concerned about their PINs and generally about their role in caring for these women. And the other thing that we also were hearing about, that there was misunderstanding and concern about who completed the birth notification when a midwife was not present at the birth. We were very mindful that some of the concerns that were being raised were potentially in breach of Article 44 and 45, the protected title and function of a midwife. And as you're aware, midwifery is regulated as a distinct profession by the NMC, and the title of midwife is protected in law. So no one can actually call themselves a midwife unless they're registered with us. And alongside that title, there is a protected legal function, which means that it's an offence for anyone other than to practice as a midwife while not registered, falsely claim to have a midwifery qualification, or use the title midwife when not entitled to do so. Article 45 talks about who can attend a woman in childbirth, and this is the language of the article. So the word attend is talking really about the care that the person will give to the woman in childbirth. It's not simply to actually be present. And the only people that can attend upon a woman in childbirth is a midwife or a registered medical practitioner or a student who's undergoing training with a view to becoming a midwife or a medical practitioner. And this must be as part of an approved course of instruction. And the exception to all of this is in case of a sudden or urgent necessity, when the birth occurs unexpectedly and outside of the care environment. Now, we were conscious that there wasn't a lot of data, particularly around free birth. So we conducted a free birth survey, and this was completed in January 2025. And we asked all trust and health boards within the UK to complete this survey, and we received a total of 88 trust and health boards which responded to the survey. And out of those 88, 47 actually recorded data specifically on free births. And we found that during that period, there were 142 free births recorded. You can see that the majority were in England, which wouldn't be surprising being the great bigger country. I think this is interesting with Northern Ireland having 39 and 9 in Scotland and 3 in Wales. And there were also 559 unplanned babies born before the midwife arrived, a BBA, and those were recorded by 47 trusts. Some of the things that we were hearing was that the women who have a free birth are not necessarily in a homogenous group, and some will receive antenatal care, so they're known to the care providers, whereas others will not actually seek any antenatal care at all and have no midwifery input. So out of the 142 free births, 124 gave us additional data on the antenatal care that was given in the case of a planned and intentional free birth, and also gave us information about midwifery care during a planned home birth. So 53 out of the 124 were planned and intentional free births, and the women had received antenatal care by the organisation. 28 out of 124, that was 23%, were planned and intentional, but the women did not receive any antenatal care, but the organisation was made aware. 29 out of 124 were planned home births, where the midwives were asked to only provide care in an emergency at the woman's request. And 14 out of the 24 were planned home births, but at the time of birth, the organisation was unable to provide a midwife to attend. 47% of the births had doulas in attendance, and 15% had what was described as other people in attendance. And they were providing medical or clinical care, and they were not regulated. We were also interested in some of the outcomes, and of the 92 free births that had recorded outcomes, 65% recorded no complications, but 16% recorded that there were maternal health complications. These included hemorrhage and infection. There was 16% recording neonatal health complications, such as a low APGAR score or some birth injury, and 3% recorded psychological outcomes, such as birth trauma or mental health concerns with the woman. There were other outcomes, which included underdiagnosed breech, shoulder dystocia, there was 1 stillbirth and 2 neonatal deaths. and 7% of the recorded free births, that was 10 out of the 142, led to safeguarding referrals for disclosures or concerns. And these were related to the welfare of the mother and baby, as well as the intent to free birth. So we needed to think about what we wanted to do next. And we decided to hold a stakeholder meeting in June 2024. And this was to discuss the way forward regarding all the concerns that the NMC were hearing. This included concerns raised with us about women free birthing, the role of unregulated people, and a range of other issues. And you can see from those stakeholders that we didn't just draw on midwives and senior midwives, but we were very keen to hear the service user woman voice. We had a safeguarding lead, birth rights were included, Doula UK, the ambulance service, the police, as well as the NMC team with colleagues from other departments within the NMC, such as standards, ELS, policy, comms and legal, and delighted that you're going to meet some of these stakeholders on the panel shortly. We then broke into 3 task and finish groups, because what we needed to think about was what were the concerns around this for the woman, the midwife and the employers. And we met on 2 or 3 occasions, and then came together to bring together our findings and our discussions. And what we concluded was that writing some principles to support women's choice really met some of these concerns, because these concerns were not just about free birth, it was just not about giving care outside of guidance, but this was for all women to support their choice in their maternity journey. We published them in August, and we've received some very, very positive feedback to date, and we're delighted with that. And we were very keen to hold this webinar to share these principles even further. They are structured around what a woman can expect, what a midwife requires, and what the employers should consider. And absolutely central to these principles are the woman's views, preferences, and decisions, so that they receive evidence-based advice and information they need to make their choices. They're not a guideline, but we're very conscious that these principles should support employer guidelines and policies, and ensure that whatever guidance and policies are there to guide practice, that they're underpinned by the NMC code and the standards of proficiency for midwives. We have an easy read version as well as a Welsh translation. This webinar is being recorded so that we can ensure as wide circulation as possible. And one of the things that's been really important within this is to identify what the NMC's role is. And it links to our criminal offences policy, which is being relaunched, because that needs to be considering about our role if we need to take this forward. And one of the things that's really important is if there are concerns about an unregulated person, it's a rather clunky term, but we call that to try and capture the range of titles that are used by people who are not registered with us, that we do have a dedicated email address, registration.investigations@nmc.uk.org, so that those concerns can be investigated. That is a totally different department from raising a concern about a registrant within fitness to practice. This team, having investigated the concerns, may contact the individual, but there may be a referral to the police who would take that forward. And we have a police inspector on the call today who will be able to talk about that role in more detail. So I'm now delighted to announce this launch of a video that we have made with a doula, very much entitled Midwives and Doulas in Partnership. And what the reason for doing this was because we recognise the invaluable role of doulas in supporting women, and we were keen to ensure that women and their families know the difference between the role of a midwife and the role of the doula, but importantly, that we work in partnership to provide choice for women and holistic care. So I shall pause so that Gurinder can launch the video. So a midwife in the UK has to be registered with us as the regulating body. They will have undergone extensive training, either 3 years or 2 years, to become a midwife. And you cannot call yourself a midwife in the UK unless you're registered with us. And it's also a protected function, so only a midwife or someone in training, a doctor or a student midwife, can give that clinical care in labour and birth. The role of the midwife is to support that woman throughout her maternity journey, providing clinical care, and importantly throughout that continuum through the pregnancy, labour and birth, and in the postnatal period. Responding to any questions, any needs that they might have, but really importantly, putting the woman at the centre of all the care so that you're taking into account their views, their preferences and their decisions. So our role ultimately is at the NMC is to protect the public, and we do that by making sure that only midwives have all the skills in order to register and then maintain their registration. And those standards of proficiencies and the code are there to reassure really the public that when they are cared for by a midwife, that they will have be practicing to a certain standard, and that their education and training will be up to date to reflect those standards and the code. So in a way, that is the benchmark on which to judge a midwife's practice.
Doulaing is not a regulated industry, so you won't find us on any professional register or anything like that. We are non-medical people. Most doulas don't have any medical training, and if they do, they don't use it in a doula setting because that's a very different hat to wear. We provide information, we provide non-judgmental, continuous support to people. We provide emotional support and practical support to families during the pregnancy, during the birth, and then in the first few weeks of parenting.
Some women don't have the support network they need. They don't have the partner or they don't have family. And it's very much for them to choose who they need to have around them, particularly in this very vulnerable time, for them to have that support. And when we're all working together, and particularly that intensive psychological support that the doula can offer, it can release that midwife to really concentrate on some of that clinical care that they need to provide. But it is absolutely working in partnership together, because we're all there to support the women, support their choices. The midwife will continue to give that support and the guidance in terms of the care to be given based on evidence, thinking about when maybe things need to change, and the doula will be there to sort of reinforce that psychologically. But it can be a very powerful and most important supportive experience for that woman when it does work well.
So absolutely, I would echo what Jackie has said, but also what we know about hormones and what we know about the positive impact of continuity of carer is that if a client has a doula and has been working with them through the pregnancy and then through the labour and birth, when we get to the place of birth, if they are confronted with a virtual stranger, it can slightly alter the process of the flow of hormones. But if they have that person with them that they already know and trust and have that relative confidence in, then they are much more easily able to engage with the amazing care that the midwife is providing, because the doula is almost bridging that gap and helping to integrate that person into that birthing room.
It is very much a privilege to have that window of opportunity to potentially make an impact in that family's lives as they transition to become parents. It's a moment in time when they're actually very open to education, learning about being parents, because they want to do the best for that baby. And I don't think that can be underestimated as a midwife. I've been a midwife for many, many years now, and I still feel that excitement. I still feel that passion. But what I really want to really hope that we get to is that woman's place is absolutely central in terms of what she wants. There's no right or wrong way of doing things. We need to give the evidence, we need to give the advice, but ultimately women do need to make those decisions, and we're there to support those decisions and keep them safe and promote good outcomes.
I became a doula after the birth of my fourth baby. So I had a caesarean birth for my first, although it was a planned home birth. And then I had 3 home births. And after my fourth baby, I started supporting within the NHS for breastfeeding peer support. And then I wanted to do more like that. And when I realised that there was a job where I could, support families throughout the pregnancy and that perinatal experience, I knew that was the job for me. And there's nothing more amazing or no better privilege for me than witnessing a person become a parent and seeing that, maybe 2 go to 3 or 4 or 5. But yeah, that to be let in on that experience and to have people say that, I contributed positively to that experience is, it's like nothing else.
Well, normally a woman will often know that she is pregnant. She may have done a pregnancy test. So she contacts her midwife through her general practitioner, and then the midwife will make contact so they can do what they call a booking visit, which is a very detailed visit where they get all the information about that woman, but importantly, thinking about what she wants, working in partnership to support those needs throughout that pregnancy and labour birth, and a lot of information giving so that women can make those decisions based on high quality evidence. It's not for the midwife to make those decisions for her, but to work together to see what the woman actually wants. So it's important to book early as you can, because that then gives the opportunity for you to meet your midwife, to discuss the plan for your maternity journey, thinking about maybe any screening tests that you might want to have and what's going to be really important to you for your care. It also helps the midwife identify where maybe some extra support is. The midwife then can obviously offer opportunities for other people to be involved in that care, and that can be also maybe included for the doula. But it's to think about getting that relationship started right from early on in the pregnancy, so that relationship can build and that trust can build, which is so important that women have confidence in the services and the people who are going to be caring for them.
If a family has chosen to use midwifery services, it's really important to understand that doulas are not there to get in the way of that. So doula's job is mainly to provide support. That's what we do. We support the woman or birthing person. We support the partner if there is a partner. We may support with other children. We may support with the extended family. But we also support the midwives or medical care providers in that experience. So when I work with a midwife, so many times it's an amazing experience for everybody. And if we work together, it provides a better outcome for the family, and they feel more satisfied, they feel happier, they feel like their choices have been respected, and that's what we're all here to do together, but not not in competition with each other, certainly. And when we work in harmony, that's when it works the best.
Thank you very much. And back to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Jackie. So now I'm delighted to introduce our panel to you who are joining us this afternoon to give us a little bit of an insight, because as Jackie's already said, they have been involved in this work. So they're going to give us some insights as to how this work is going to help them support and what it's been like to be part of this work and this journey with us. So I'll introduce them one at a time. I'll come to Kirsty first, who's from Doula UK. And if you introduce yourself, Kirsty, and then tell us what the principles have meant to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. So hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Kirsty. I'm Partnerships Coordinator at Doula UK. I'm also the owner of the Essex Birth Company, and I've personally been a doula for around 8 years. I have many other roles within perinatal support too, including that of a counsellor and trauma therapist. It's provided me with a vast and varied experience. I've had the pleasure of working alongside a lot of midwives, some of who I know are on this call today. So for over the last couple of decades, Doula UK have championed life-changing, compassionate support in pregnancy, birth, and the postnatal period for all families, regardless of their circumstance or choices. The principles reaffirm the importance of kind, safe, and personalised care, as well as defining the care provider's roles. These principles resonate deeply with the Doula UK ethos. So I'm going to talk specifically about Doula UK doulas now. Although we abide by the code of conduct, each doula operates autonomously within their own doula business. So support may vary, but we all comply with the code of conduct, guidelines, and the Doula UK philosophy. The principles state that women and birthing people should receive care that is kind, compassionate, safe, and personalised. And that should be applied across all settings: home, hospital, birth centres. And it also acknowledges the freedom of choice to birth outside of clinical guidance, such as opting for free birth or declining midwifery care. Doula UK doulas reflect these principles. We offer personalised and compassionate support. Doulas build rapport, remain present, and offer emotional and practical support tailored to each family's unique journey. The pinnacle of our support is to respect autonomy and choice. Doulas provide balanced, evidence-based information. We don't tell our clients what to do. They're provided with the information so they can make fully informed decisions in their own right. Doulas support any birth type they feel comfortable to support. Some support free birth, some don't. When a decision is made outside of NHS guidance, doulas help clarify rights, facilitate respectful communication, and offer continuity and reassurance. Whilst doulas don't advise medically, there's an invaluable role in advocacy. Doulas help interpret and simplify guidance into accessible language. Some doulas signpost to organisations such as Birth Rights and AIMS. We want to support confidence and autonomy. Doulas often suggest clients build birth preferences to explore options and create plans that align with their own individual values. Doula UK also emphasises clear, safe boundaries, such as understanding we are non-clinical. We don't replace midwives. And our gold standard of support sees us not only signing the code of conduct, but undertaking birth preparation courses, being mentored. We partake in regular CPD and understand there's a grievance process, just to name a few. One point I'd like to clarify in the language of the guidelines is the use of the word attend. The documents suggest doulas should not attend women in labour. We understand this means not providing medical care, of which, of course, we don't. But doulas do attend births in the sense of being present. I just wanted to make that distinction clear. So Doula UK extends accessibility and advocacy through the Access Fund. which provides doulas to families facing disadvantage. This free support empowers birth choices by reducing financial or systemic barriers. It offers continuity and dignity, particularly where clinical care may feel out of reach. This service is specifically beneficial for families with multiple areas of marginalisation in helping to reach equitable outcomes. So in summary, Doula UK doulas are steadfast perinatal companions, walking beside families, providing support, empowerment and respect for their choices. By aligning with the NMC principles, doulas enhance personalised care, uphold autonomy and support safety within informed decision-making. Together with midwives and maternity teams, doulas help create a shared vision, kind, compassionate, safe and individualised care that honours every birthing person's values, even when that care looks different. Thank you, and I look forward to continued collaboration to support choices with integrity and respect.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. So now I'll hand over to Kerry to introduce herself and tell us her perspective on the principles. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Kerry Aldred. I'm a detective inspector and I currently work in the National Centre for VAUG and Public Protection, so Violence Against Women and Girls and Public Protection. A little bit of background around me very quickly as well, because I'm also a registered midwife. And personally, I'm a mum to 3 children, and first being a home birth, second and third being in hospital, but had personal experience as well of birthing outside of guidelines. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the VAUG programme and around my role in policing as well, and the principles, and a little bit about the context and background discussion that we had in discussing the principles. So within the VAUG programme, we look nationally around policing's response to crimes involving violence against women and girls. So these crimes are predominantly domestic abuse, stalking, harassment, rape, sexual offences, female genital mutilation, human trafficking, modern slavery, forced marriage, on-and-based abuse and online abuse. So I know that some of those will overlap quite a lot within the world of midwifery as well, and others not so much. We had a really in-depth conversation within our working groups, and I wanted to touch on that because Kirsty's actually touched on some of the things that I was going to mention, which feeds in quite nicely. So the document includes 2 key pieces of legislation. So Article 44, which is the protected title of midwife. And I'm going to touch on the language used because if you're within the midwifery profession, you are normally well versed around the differences between a qualified midwife and a registered midwife. So qualified midwife is somebody who's gone to university and gained a qualification, a midwifery degree. However, a registered midwife is somebody who's had the qualification and then subsequently gone onto the register and stayed on the register, or gone back onto the register, for example. And the importance of this within terms of legislation is because I think potentially we can see people using language and saying they're a qualified midwife and offering services, potentially misleading women and families into believing that they are a registered midwife and not solely qualified. So again, it's just about the terminology and language that's used within that, which is interesting. Then you've got Article 45. So that's, again, Kirsty's mentioned it and Jackie touched on it as well earlier on, around only a midwife to attend. So the legislation is quite dated now. Legislation normally is, it comes in 1 year and then years later, until there's a stated case which challenges part of the legislation or part of terminology. That's when legislation is then adapted. So the legal definitions, for example, so attendance, and Kirsty made this point, doulas and other non-professionals will attend births, but attend in this case is meaning providing care as a midwife. So a really good example of that, if you look at the term, and we discussed this within the working group, if you look at the legal term possession, in English, in plain English, possession means having hold of something. But in examples under the Theft Act, for example, possession is actually legally much wider. So it's having in your control. So it might not be physically in your hand, but you still would have possession of that legally. So that's, again, just around the use of language that we use. Moving on, so in terms of the principles and what they mean, they're an absolute key document to have, and really good to see that, and really positive response so far from people that have looked at them and fed back. In terms of policing's response, so our next steps, so we're looking at now some communication and engagement with our forces around legislation, and around crime recording as well, because our police forces work very similar to NHS Trust, where we have several different police forces that have their own different ways of working and different councils and NHS Trust that work with them, so they can work sometimes very differently. So we are trying to provide some continuity with our police forces in our comms and engagement and recording of crimes and incidents. And as I think Tracy and Jackie mentioned earlier, around the NMC having a direct email to look at reports. So any reports that do come in, we're going to be looking and working more closely with the NMC moving forward to look at these reports and how we can work together in a collaborative way. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kerry. I'll hand over to Camilla now to introduce herself and tell us about her perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name's Camilla, and I'm consultant midwife for East Midlands Ambulance Service and a midwife for the London Ambulance Service as well. So thank you to the NMC for including the ambulance service in the development of these principles. The wording was developed by members of the National Pre-Hospital Maternity and Newborn Care Group, and have been endorsed by the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives. So the part that's about the ambulance service within the principles kind of outlines how ambulance services can support women and families to have safe births if they're required, obviously in the community setting. So I guess I'll just start with kind of giving the background from the ambulance service perspective as to how we became involved and kind of the relevance to things that have been happening and how we hope that the principles can help. So we've had a number of cases, which I'll just run through kind of the overview of some of them. So women that were planning planning free birth, and then someone in the property calling 999 at some point, not necessarily the woman, sometimes her partner, sometimes the doula, and then the woman and family kind of being surprised that they were being recommended to go to hospital, or that the birth plan was not being followed. And some cases, the ambulance crews were being asked to wait in another room for many hours, meaning that they were not able to respond to other emergencies. There have also been cases where the maternity service had suspended their home birth service, either unofficially or officially. And so when a woman planning a home birth was in labour and either couldn't or didn't want to go to hospital on the request of the maternity service, then the ambulance service was being asked to attend instead, and again could be on scene for many hours. And then there was other cases where sometimes midwives were told by their organisations that they shouldn't go, or it was kind of deemed that the midwives would feel too uncomfortable providing care in certain cases, particularly if the woman had certain risk factors. And then in those situations, inevitably, the woman who either couldn't or didn't want to leave her home would then call the ambulance service. And so you'd have a situation where a woman with a number of high risk factors would be attended to by ambulance crews instead of maternity services. And ambulance crews have a varied amount of training. Often it's quite minimal because they need to be able to attend to patients of all different groups. They don't have fetal monitoring. They obviously don't have midwifery skills or midwifery to offer. And so in these cases, it would cause safety issues and also short and long-term trauma to the ambulance clinicians who'd attended the cases instead of midwives who are also worried about attending because of the impact on themselves and the woman and family. So although I've discussed these kind of things in the past tense, I would say that these cases still are ongoing. And so hopefully the principals address them with us outlining what the ambulance service is and what it isn't. So I guess just to run through a few headlines then from the principals. The ambulance service is obviously to help the community, the public, in emergencies that arise within their lives. And so if that is a birth emergency, then obviously that's what we're there for, to come and support midwives or support women and families who are experiencing emergencies in the out of hospital setting. But what we're not there to provide is routine maternity care or to be a backup service to a home birth service that can't run, for example. Ambulances cannot be requested just in case or to wait outside of the property. So, for example, for a woman that's having a home birth with risk factors. And that's because that then puts other members of the public who are having an emergency at risk because they're not going to get an ambulance in a timely way. So the ambulance can only be called at the point when the emergency is happening. And women and families that are planning to have home births need to be informed of that ahead of time. If the ambulance service is on scene without midwives, then of course, as I said, they have different skills to midwives. They are highly skilled clinicians, but they're different to midwives, and they cannot facilitate things like water birth or midwifery care, for example, fetal monitoring, as I mentioned, or things like an episiotomy. So for this reason, if the ambulance service is on scene and midwives are not present and are not coming, then they will recommend that the woman is transported to hospital, and that will be the nearest hospital to her address in most circumstances. So if the woman then declines, because obviously if she has capacity and she says, no, thank you, I'd like to stay in my home where I've planned to give birth, then the maternity service does have a duty to send a midwife. In the same way that they would have a duty to provide care to a woman on the labour ward requiring one-to-one care. The same thing, if the baby has already been born, the ambulance service can't discharge a newborn baby that's not been registered in the community. So they do need a face-to-face handover from to maternity services. And we in the ambulance service totally understand that this is not always easy, and if the home birth service has been suspended due to sickness or other reasons, then it may be difficult. But of course, from our perspective, we also have a limited amount of resources and ambulances on the road, and therefore, if we're on scene for hours and hours waiting to hand over, or for hours and hours with a woman in labour, because we're not going to be able to walk away from that woman who's in labour without handing her over to a healthcare professional, then that would also put people at risk. So essentially, we need to work together. The ambulance service is a key stakeholder within providing safe maternity and newborn care within this country. And so we're really grateful to the NMC for acknowledging that, and within these principles, hopefully that is clear. And part of that working together is to understand the different jurisdictions that we have and what care we can and can't provide. And so, yeah, just thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about this today.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Kirsty, Kerry and Camilla for your perspectives on that, and for really bringing the document to life and showing how, with us working together, we've been able to come up with something that will support women's choices through their maternity journey. I would like to go over to Jackie briefly, who will just give us a little bit of a quick update on what principles are and aren't. And then we thank you so much. There's loads of questions in the Q&A, and we'll take some time to go to questions, and because we really want to take this time to hear from you and for you to understand how the principles can support your work. But first, over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Tracy. Yes, the NMC is not in a position within its regulatory remit to actually produce guidance or specific comments around clinical care. So this is why these are principles. So They are fairly high level. They probably don't give you some of the detail that you may need within your local context. But what we would hope is that using these principles to underpin your work around maybe updating guidance and policies, it will support midwives to be much clearer about their role within some of the more challenging situations, but also importantly, how they can be supporting that choice for all women in their care. So more work to do, I think, in this space. And I think one of the most important things that we did here was that sometimes that guidance and policies are not underpinned by the code and our standards of proficiency for midwives. So together with the principles, our standards need to be used in your discussions and further work in terms of your guidance and policies. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Now we'll go over to Verena, who has been looking at the questions that we've had coming through, and get started on answering some of them. Over to you, Verena.
Yes, thanks very much, Tracy, and thank you everybody for the questions that are coming through in the Q&A. There's a couple that are really related to or picking up on the freebirth survey. So I think this is probably a sort of question for Jackie and Tracy. I'll put one of them up, which is around whether we're thinking about re-auditing in 12 to 18 months. And another question was around, did we have any idea of what time period people were developing the psychological concerns that were identified in the freebirth survey? And I think that this may play into a little bit of an explanation of the snapshot element of the freebirth survey. The other question was there any breakdown of the woman's risk factors and parity in the freebirth cohort? So really 3 points about the freebirth survey. Are we going to repeat it? Do we know what the time period was between people maybe illustrating psychological or mental health concerns, and did we have any background on the breakdown of risk factors?
Maybe I could start, and then Jackie, if you wanted to come in. As Jackie said, this was something where we realised there wasn't any data around free birth, so this was just sort of a quick snapshot to get that information. Because it was a snapshot, one of the discussions we did have was with the chief midwifery officers about how they would go on to start capturing the data, so we'd have more robust data. As you can see, when Jackie put up the information, even though Northern Ireland is a smaller country and has 5 trusts, they had more free births that were coming up. That's because Northern Ireland already captured their data. So what we were trying to look at is, where is their data being captured? How well do we know what's going on? And even the amount of organisations that we have and the amount of them that responded was less than half. And then after that, from that half, not all of them actually had free births as something that they're recording. So for us, it was kind of starting those conversations, having a data set that we could look at and have as a sort of something to work from. But now it's over to the chief midwifery officers and individual regions and trusts to take that forward. So from our perspective, it's not something that we have discussed or have had any thought about repeating at this point in time. In terms of, because of the snapshot as well, it was just, has there been any concerns of the varying types? And it wasn't really about timeframes, but every woman that we every organisation that we looked for was for women within a certain time frame. So it was within the last financial year, 2023 to 2024. So we know that it was a set time frame that we were looking for. So the women would have birthed within that time frame. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Jackie.
No, I don't think so. I think some of the questions that have been asked in the Q&A, the questions were not that specific within the survey. And I think the one specifically around developing mental health, it was a 1 year. So that we didn't ask about how long after the birth that had been developed, but it was within that year time frame.
Yeah. And there was also a question I saw about whether we'll be publishing. One of the things, if we do publish, it's with the caveat that of 146 organisations, only 87, is that correct, responded. So, and then of those, 88 responded, and of those, about half of them were the ones that we looked at. So it's a very small cohort. So if we're trying to get away that if we do publish this further, it's with that caveat in mind that we've got information, we've started collecting data, but we didn't get information from everybody across the UK. So it's not data that is sort of significant if you're looking at it from a research perspective.
I think, Tracy, as well, it sort of also identified a need for that data to be collected, because we knew that there was often there wasn't clarity as to whether the birth actually was a free birth or whether it was a born before arrival. So I think it's hopefully supported that drive to get that data captured more accurately.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be sort of theming and going up and down the questions. So I've got one question, which is really for Kirsty. It's from around the sort of thanking you, Kirsty, for your introduction, and just asking the question, how do you ensure doulas provide balanced and evidence-based information as you describe?
All doulas that are part of Doula UK, as I said in my presentation, sign a code of conduct and agree to a philosophy. We, the leadership team, can't be there at every interaction, at every birth, obviously. But the doulas have all undertaken a preparation course. They've been mentored. And throughout this whole time, evidence-based information is something that's really key and shared on the preparation courses. We don't know exactly what every single person is saying, unfortunately. That would be impossible. From what I know in the doula community, a lot of everything we do is based around evidence. We signpost to evidence-based information, birthrights, aims, Dr. Sarah Wickham, I'm just trying to think now, so that families can look at that evidence-based information and use that to make their decisions. Like I say, I can't police what everybody tells people, but they do sign up to that code of conduct.
Thank you, Kirsty. I think it's around sort of picking up on the evidence base and how that's sort of applied and so on through the auspices of Doula UK and your ongoing work around education and so on. I've got one here that really relates to it's about the principles seem to be focused on free birth, and what about out of guidance, especially when women are choosing a home birth, which is extremely high risk, or where there's lots of sort of elements of asking midwives to sit in the next room or in the room where they don't want midwifery care, and about the psychological impact on staff. We have had some elements of answering this question, but I think if I could pass it over to Jackie or Tracy, just to pick up on the point that the principles are not just about free birth. And also on that element, Jackie, that you said that the answers to every clinical situation are not in the principles, and about working with others to use the principles as a baseline.
No, I think that's right, Verena, and I think we discussed this long and hard about, you know, how we wanted to approach this, and decided that it really wasn't about any particular scenario, such as a woman having a free birth or somebody who was requesting something outside of guidance, but this choice was for everyone, and those principles applied irrespective of the type of birth that they wanted. And the important thing is that the woman is able to make that choice, and they have the right information, which is evidence-based, upon which they're making those choices. So those choices may not be what people would recommend, you know, the midwife or even the doula would recommend, but it's important that the woman has that information to make that choice. But the important thing as well is to think that they may change their mind. So keeping that relationship and that dialogue going, so that if there are different things to update or more discussion to have, that the midwife is there to have that. I think this is not easy. We're not suggesting that any of this is easy. And I think it's also can be very, very difficult for particularly the midwives who are involved and are the ones will be providing the care. And that's why we talk about in the principles the importance of them having that support, that wraparound support, as well as maybe particularly into additional training or education around this, and be part of the plan so that they are going in knowing what the plan is. Tracy, do you want to come in at all?
Yeah, I agree, Jackie, and I'm thinking also that's why we've said that we want these principles for when organisations are looking at their own guidance and policies, that they're sort of referencing the code and the standards of proficiency for midwives in what they're doing, and maybe they can use this as a basis to develop their own care out of guidance policies and procedures, sort of steeped in supporting the woman's choice in how she has her birth.
Thanks, Tracy. I've got another one, really, which I think is also one for both Kirsty and Tracy and Jackie. It's querying the point of, it's asking whether we had any conversations with the Scottish Doula network as part of this work. And the question is, the doulas working in Scotland tend not to be part of Doula UK, but with a Scottish Doula network. This doesn't have a code of conduct as Doula UK do. This makes it more difficult for us to raise concerns if we have any, and to be clear about training and supervision. Were there any conversations with the Scottish Doula network as part of this work? So, Tracy, shall we start with you, and then maybe Kirsty, if you can pick up whether there are links across the 4 countries with maybe different networks of doulas?
But we didn't have a conversation with them, as far as I can recollect, as part of this work. But what we aimed to do was get representation from a varied amount of stakeholders. So that's why we sought Doula UK, because they're for the UK. So it may be a bit of an oversight on our part that we didn't speak to the Scottish Doula Network if they don't have any body that's within Doula UK. But we did feel that by having this work with Doula UK, we were getting representation from a doula voice, and it was important to have that voice speak on behalf of doulas in the work. And I'll let Kirsty come in.
Yeah, from my point of view, everything I brought today was on behalf of Doula UK. We do have Scottish doulas within the Doula UK network. I can't speak for the Scottish Doula network, though, I'm afraid.
Yeah, but I think ultimately, although you spoke on behalf of Doula UK, the views that you brought to the principals were on behalf of doulas and sort of talking about doulas. So, and with the same we did, we had service user voices, and we had GPs, we had obstetricians, anaesthetists speaking on behalf of the profession. We've got Kerry sort of bringing that police voice. We've got the ambulance voice. So even though we didn't have a specific type of organisation, we were more looking at getting a wide representation. So do you feel that sort of when you were part of those conversations, it was representing sort of what doulas should be doing as a whole?
Do anybody that's part of Doula UK, and we have doulas from all parts of the UK for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I think it's also worth saying that we had 4-country representation on the groups throughout. It wasn't just England; it was across the UK. This is one that goes back to our point in the question around. Oh dear, where I've lost it. Let me see. Oh, sorry. my things have gone all funny. Oh yes, it's a question around midwives are very fearful of birth outside guidance. This can cause a lot of personal stress, and in extremes can be career ending. How can we best support our colleagues? And we do have an example in the principles of work that's been done in Northern Ireland on a regional framework for supporting people when the situation comes under care outside guidance, and that's a multi-professional one. So I just wondered, Tracy and Jackie, what you think about, again, the point about using these principles as a baseline for helping with those situations where birth outside guidance is coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we have heard in a lot of our discussions is sometimes some of the policies guidance are put through from a sort of a legal perspective, from the legal colleagues within the trust or the health board. And I think that is what we were hearing, is sometimes that position puts midwives in a sort of a difficult position in terms of what that means for them adhering to the code and the standards of proficiency. And I'll give you a tangible example. There is one of the proficiencies that talks about where women are asking for things outside of guidance, that you continue to risk assess and keep that sort of dialogue continuing. So where perhaps a position has been put that we're not going to send any midwives, and you call the ambulance service if you need, as Camilla has addressed, that puts the ambulance service in a very difficult position, because the midwife, it wouldn't necessarily be a paramedic who would attend. It may be a technician. So, and if there's been no contact, how do those risks continue to be assessed? How does that discussion continue? So I think that is a sort of a clear understanding of this sort of conflict, I think, that's been happening. Whereas what we're hoping for now is that using those principles and our standards, that those conversations can be re-energized really, and perhaps policies and guidance amended so that it puts midwives in a sort of a more comfortable position than they perhaps have been up to date. Tracy, did you want to add anything?
No, I agree, Jackie. I haven't got anything to add. Thank you.
Thanks both. We've got one which is linked to this, which is around what is the NMC strategy to proactively support the well-being of midwives, supporting women making decisions to birth outside guidance. I think we've already covered this to some elements, but I suppose it's about re-emphasising the points about using these principles.
Yes, I think these principles, we're hoping that they will be used to develop guidance. And we've already been approached by some organisations that are looking to develop sort of care outside of guidance on a more national scale and more locally. And we've sent them the copy of the principles so they can use that as part of their development of those pieces of guidance.
Yeah, I think, Tracy, you know, that is the one element that I don't think we were able to resolve.
Yeah.
The impact on midwives, you know, that women are making choices which perhaps they wouldn't agree with or wouldn't recommend, and it really causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress for midwives who are involved in that care. But I think it's about having those plans in advance and making sure that as far as possible that support can be given to those midwives, so they're not going into situations that they're totally unplanned for. And those conversations would need to be with the woman and family as well. You know, support from more senior colleagues, as well as you know, what actually happens after the event as well. But I think it is something that we've talked about long and hard, that it is unfortunately the reality that it often can be it can be very challenging for midwives, and I don't think we would want to take that away in any way. And I think, I mean, I don't know, Camilla, if you want to say something, because we've equally heard about that anxiety for the crews that attend those situations when midwives are not necessarily present as well.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult on both, you know, for both professions, and something that's a gap that's not being currently addressed adequately enough for all the different professions that are involved. And I know that, you know, the consultant midwives that are involved in lots of the care planning, obviously not myself as the consultant midwife for the ambulance service, but consultant midwives for trusts that are involved in care planning. There's a lot of really challenging conversations and having to go between legal teams and what the woman's asking for and what the midwives are comfortable with, and then within the constraints of what the trust can actually provide on the day. So I think there's a lot of unanswered questions there, which are kind of adding to the distress of midwives and other healthcare professionals that inevitably become involved.
And I think something that we learned is from this is that this is this is not a homogenous group, you know, because there are women who still want to engage with the service and will listen and discuss their options. There are other women who are making those choices because perhaps the service is not there for them, such as choosing a free birth because a home birth isn't being provided, and there's women that don't want to engage. So I think this is the challenge, isn't it, really, to actually work with women individually as to what they want and understand why they're asking for these things. And I think in the light of sort of increased medicalisation, increased induction, and all those changes that are happening within maternity, it's making women making choices that they may not have made, you know, in earlier years. But I think absolutely the midwives do need that support from their senior colleagues.
Thank you both. The support and so on is coming through quite a lot, obviously in the questions, but there's also something about the point about concerns, and this is a question which is, I think, both for Tracy and for Kirsty. It does pick up on what we've got in the principles about contacting the email address at the NMC. But Kirsty, the question is, what steps can be taken if there are concerns about a Doula UK practitioner. And then a little sort of second part to the question is, what weight does the code of conduct hold if it's not the equivalent of a regulatory framework? So just thinking about what steps can be taken if there are concerns. Jackie, if you could maybe start off with what's in the principles about raising concerns.
Yes, I mean, when we started to discuss these scenarios, one of the things we recognise is that we needed to tighten our processes, because without having a dedicated point of contact, if people were raising concern about somebody who was not on their register, then there wasn't really anywhere for people to go, because obviously we couldn't investigate it through our fitness to practice. We've tightened up our processes now in this regard. Kerry's been really, really helpful in advice where there are cases that need to be looked at in more depth, and working with the police as well to sort of explain why there are those concerns. I think it is challenging. It's sometimes very difficult to prove. We've heard stories where midwives have gone into a person's home and they suspect that maybe instruments have been used or clinical care has been given, but it's very difficult to really be absolutely certain that's taken place, particularly when the woman herself doesn't want to make a complaint or raise a concern themselves. So I think I suppose the message really is, if you're unsure, don't hesitate to recommend and use that email address, and then we can investigate accordingly. And it may be, and I'd be interested to hear Kerry's view on this, it may be that we need a sort of a test. It may come to the fact that we have to have a test case in this regard, because there hasn't been any sort of prosecutions in this space so far. And of course, we've learned a lot of police officers wouldn't necessarily understand this part of the legislation. But I think this piece of work has enabled us to really tighten our processes and now have that dedicated inbox. So do share your concerns so that we can investigate if need be. Kerry, anything you'd like to say on this?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of points there, Jackie, you've touched on. So firstly, it's the threshold to report, because I think there's a definite barrier in reporting things to the police for sure. People think, it's not, it doesn't meet that threshold, and we might report it by other means, so whether it be NMC or the trust. So they wouldn't directly come to policing, whereas policing is not solely to report crimes. It can be built as an intelligence picture as well. So we can take reports and update our systems with intelligence, and that then builds a bigger picture. So if, for example, you've got a person who's providing care for somebody acting as a midwife and there's concerns, if there's 10 families that they've provided care for and there's 10 concerns, unless they report, we won't know that it's going on. So I would always encourage that reporting, and you can report directly into the police. There's online methods that you can report via Crime Stoppers, and by you reporting doesn't necessarily mean that we will, take action there and then. It might be that we take action in terms of we will put that in as a piece of intelligence and we'll monitor it, so that if then by, a few times that there's a couple of, for example, if somebody's reported 2 or 3 times, we might then think actually there is something that we need to do, and it's all risk assessed, and it's a bespoke on a case-by-case basis. And I think the other thing is, in terms of legalities, you're right, Jackie, we've not been able to find any cases as yet. No, that's not to say it isn't happening, or they shouldn't have been, it's because the criminal threshold is quite a high one. So not to bore everyone with legalities, but there are two different types of levels that we work to. So a civil level is on the balance of probability, which is quite a low threshold, which is used in civil cases. Criminal cases is beyond reasonable doubt. So our cases that we build against perpetrator suspects, they would be an evidence base would be built. We would present those findings to the Crown Prosecution Service, and it would be up to them then as to whether we would prosecute that person. So there's a few different stages that we have to get to, and I suspect, like Jackie said, a lot of the families that potentially have had people that have been caring for them, they don't actually want to support a prosecution because they are almost supporting them in doing what they want to do, i.e. birthing outside of guidance. So that's where it's a really tricky area. But like I said earlier, we're going to be working with the NMC like we have been, and looking at that piece. There have been cases where we're looking at nationally around specific police forces and what's going on, and doing a bit more of a dive into them. But I think sometimes it's the unknown. I think they're just not being reported. So, how can we then start to move forward and investigate if we don't know about them, which hopefully with the NMC and the email that's been provided and the good relationship that we've built now as part of this principles document, I think that can only be a positive moving forward.
Thank you very much, both of you. It sort of links in with something that's come up, which is really a statement around, would the NMC recommend that all NHS Trust legal teams are made aware of these principles, that they're there to support some of the advice they're asked to provide to clinicians? And I suppose in a general theme, that's behind and what we would hope would be the use of these principles going forward, that they can be used in that supportive way. Kirsty, just linking into the code of conduct question, which was sort of around the sort of the teeth, I suppose, in the code of conduct, but this is round about the requirement for doulas to document discussions and the requirements to keep records for a period of time. So does Doula UK have guidance for doulas around documenting discussions and the requirements to keep records for a particular period of time?
I don't think that's something we have a guideline on. Some doulas spend 100 more maybe hours with their clients. It's nothing that I've ever seen documented. Particularly some doulas, everybody runs their own business as a doula, working as an individual, and some doulas will go back after a birth and write some things down, some notes maybe, but there isn't a guideline about that. I think it's recommended, but no, nothing set in stone.
Thank you for that. There's one point here which I'll just put in the questions, which is really picking up on something which we did talk about, but it's making the point that women shouldn't be labelled as outside guidance. And I was just wondering collectively, really, from all of you on the panel, because the point's been made that it disempowers women and it doesn't really help. It's more about provision of better births. So maybe thinking about the labelling. And I think it's worth saying up front that was why we've gone for this is about personalised care and support as the title of this particular document. So rather than entitling it anything to do with free birth or anything to do with care outside guidance, although those are implicit within or explicit within the text. So maybe Tracy, if you'd like to maybe just make that point about the language and the labelling and the fact that we've we've used the labelling, even though we would, in essence, agree with the point that's not particularly helpful to label it as, in inverted commas, outside guidance, because it's really about personalised care.
Yeah, I agree. That was the whole idea around the piece of work, that we are personalising the care to the woman and the family, and whatever that care is that they want, that is the care that we provide for them. So that's why we've changed the name. But I suppose there's a lot of talk about care outside of guidance, so we've gone with the conversation that we're having today. But from our perspective, it's more about personalisation to that person, to that the way that they want to birth. So yeah, but I suppose it's seen that because we've called it supporting women's choices, there is another sort of view that there hasn't been that work around the guidance that is set within each organisation, and women choosing options for themselves that vary from that guidance. So I think that's why we've come to this talk about there's still some scope to do something around care outside of guidance, which is different to what we've done. I don't know if Jackie or anybody else wants to come in on that.
I think it was quite difficult, wasn't it? Because all these sort of issues sort of came together. And we didn't want to particularly focus on free birth. We didn't want to talk about particularly outside of guidance. We were trying to get a set of principles which would apply to all women and all the decisions they were making, recognizing that women just don't have to take that advice. They can pick and choose what advice they want to take or not take. They can decline care. They can reinstate the care if they want. So it's a very sort of fluid situation. But from the role of the midwife's point of view, would be to be there to give that advice based on evidence at the point that the woman, wants it, recognizing that it might need to be repeated or changed depending on what the woman is saying. I think in the chat there's been quite a lot of concern still about the midwife's role in this, and I think we tried to, within the principles, really stress the importance of record keeping when care is given and when care is not given, when the advice is perhaps given and what evidence was used, and when what the woman then was choosing to do. We can never say that a midwife would never be reported or a concern raised about them to our fitness to practice processes, because as you know, anybody can raise a concern. But if you have adhered to your code and your standards of proficiency and documented everything that's done, it's not necessarily at all going to be that there's going to be any process that will continue. It will be potentially closed at screening or indeed at the investigation at sort of local level. But we couldn't ever say that you wouldn't actually have to still be part of that referral. And that's, it's very, very unfortunate, I think, for anybody caught up in that. But your record keeping is absolutely key. And this is why we've really tried to talk about midwives being involved in that plan, because the tendency has been for consultant midwives to do it, whereas actually it doesn't always involve the midwives who are involved directly with the care.
Thank you very much, Jackie. We have come to the end of our webinar. We have had such a rich discussion. There are some questions that we haven't been able to get to. There's so many questions, so thank you very much for posing them. There are a lot of themes around still looking at sort of more around what we can do for the midwife. So we will take all of the questions and all of the information that you've given us today away and use that as we continue to progress this work with this team, with our ambulance service, with our colleagues from Police, Doula UK, and all the other stakeholders that were part of this work, have been part of this work so far. So thank you very much. Apologies that we couldn't get to all the questions, but it has been a wonderful time having all these discussions with you, and thanks again to our panel for all their insights and for all their support, to Kirsty, Kerry and Camilla for all that you've done supporting this piece of work. So there are 2 polls that are going to be on screen for you now. If you can fill those in, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you so much. I mean, will these polls they'll be up for a few seconds, I assume, won't they, Garinda? Then there'll be another poll that we have to do. But whilst that's going on, I'd also like to thank Jackie and Verena for all they've done. Jackie and Verena, I joined them a year into the journey, so they've been here since the journey into this piece of work started, and have spent a lot of time and dedication in getting the principles to where they are today. So thank you very much, and also for all of you for coming, for supporting the principles. And I'm sure as we continue to work in this area and continue to explore how we can make sure that the care is personalised to women and families, that we will continue to work with you and continue to have that support. So thank you all, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.